Hello everybody, welcome to this exclusive Telegraph subscriber event, How to Sleep Better in 2023. It's the very first in our January Health Reset series. So my name's Miranda Levy, I'm a senior commissioning editor here on the Daily Telegraph. I'm particularly interested in writing about health and editing articles about health. I've also written a book on insomnia, which makes me particularly interested in this evening's event. My book's called The Insomnia Diaries, How I Learned to Sleep Again. I'm going to be your host for the evening. So before we get started, I'd like to remind you, if you'd like to make the video full screen, click on the square on the bottom right. If you want to submit questions, please pop them into the Q&A box. I've got a special bit of kit here, or I can read your questions as we go along or at the end. We'll try and tackle as many as we can. We might stop for a few as we go along. Otherwise, we're going to have a good 15 minutes at the end of the hour to go through. You please include your first name if you can, so we can see who the question has come from and tailor our answers. So I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Dr Guy Meadows, who's an absolute expert in all things sleep. He's the clinical director of the Sleep School, and he's a leading figure in the area of chronic insomnia. I mean, I'd been hearing about Dr Guy for years. He's fantastic. Now he's devoted the last 2 decades to sleep research and the prevention of sleeping disorders, which is just the best work. Guy is also the author of the Sleep Book, and he's the creator of the Sleep School app. He's a pioneer of the use of acceptance and commitment therapy, known as ACT, which is a specific way of looking at sleep and insomnia, which maybe we can explore, and mindfulness in treating insomnia. So Guy, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with some basics, really. We all know what it's like to have a bad night's sleep. I mean, who hasn't? Children, exams, interview stress. But how would you describe insomnia specifically?
So if we talk about insomnia just means a difficulty sleeping. Mm-hmm. So there are, we could say that everyone on the planet will experience sleeping difficulty at some point in their lives. And when we talk about acute insomnia, what we're saying is that some short-lived stressor will come along, whether that be an argument with a loved one, or a stressful event at work, or maybe some sort of physical pain, an injury or something, or a cough or a cold. What we'll often see is that sleep will worsen during that period, but when the stressor disappears, then sleep will return back to normal. If we're looking for sort of a clinical diagnosis of chronic insomnia, that's where we would say that you are experiencing 3 or more nights of poor sleep for a period of greater than 3 months, where it's affecting your ability to fall asleep, stay asleep, sort of causing you to wake up early, typically taking you longer than, say, 30 minutes to fall asleep or fall back to sleep. And also when it's beginning to affect your ability to cope during the daytime. It's affecting your mood and your performance at work, etc. Yeah,
I was going to say, because you talk about poor sleep. I mean, for some people they may feel terrible after 7 or 8 hours, or some people might feel fine after 3 or 4. I mean, maybe this is something we can come back to later, but it's quite subjective, isn't it? Is it more about how you feel the next day that defines? Do you think?
We'll probably definitely dive into this,
yes,
how many hours do we need?
Let's come on to that, yeah. Okay, so now obviously, or not obviously, but many people, and probably it's a lot of the people joining in, will have problems with their sleep, hence the issues. It doesn't have to be seasonal, does it? It doesn't have to be linked to things that are going on, but I would say that maybe in the winter, maybe some people, there's 2 parts to this question actually. What challenges do we face with our sleep in general at this time of year, the sort of miserable bit in January. But also, we've been through some quite big challenges, haven't we, as a society in the last few years. I mean, where do you start? So let's chunk this down. So to start with, this time of year, what kind of problems do you think people have?
Well, I think it's actually really interesting what you were sort of alluding to, that is there a sort of a seasonality to our sleep disturbance?
Yeah.
And actually, if we look at our clinic, our busiest times are now, when it's darkest, and then in the summer, when it's brightest.
Well, that's interesting.
And that's because your sleep-wake cycle is intimately connected to the light-dark cycle.
Yeah.
So if we focus on now, this is a challenging time for sleep. The biggest factor is the fact that the days are really short. We don't have a huge amount of light out there. Light is so important for so many factors, but it's really important for our sleep. We certainly know that the countries that live in the northern hemisphere, like us in the UK, but even further in Scandinavia, we experience a slight shifting, a delaying in our sleep as a result of the seasonality. But the fact that it's darker in the mornings mean that we might wake up a little bit later and we might get up a little bit later. So it doesn't really affect the total amount of sleep that we're getting. But what we also see is that one of the big factors is that link between light and our mental health. So we're sleep deprived generally because we spend a lot more time indoors than we perhaps would have done. But in the winter, it's cold outside. We don't really want to go outside. So we're not getting as much good quality sunlight, especially that morning sunlight. And that's so important for helping to reset our body clock in the morning. So
yeah, you see, that interests me. I've read this before, like in so many places, get out first thing, go for a walk, almost like roll out of bed and get exercise. I mean, why is that? What's the science behind how light gets you going in the morning?
So our sleep is regulated by our internal body clock. And that creates this incredible 24-hour rhythm, in which is telling all of the biological processes inside us either to be active during the daytime or inactive in the nighttime. Now, your internal body clock is kept on time by the external cue of the rise and fall of the sun. So we have these incredible 500 million year old light sensitive cells in our eyes, which are detecting the amount of sunlight in the environment. So when that sunlight hits our eyes in the morning, that activates the release of cortisol, the awakening hormone, the stress hormone that gives us that get up and go. And that helps to synchronize our body to this time zone. So it's telling our body, now is the time to be awake, now is the time to do things which are the waking activities, to be digesting, to be eating, to be moving, to be working, to be using our brain. And then as we're going through the day, then that light level is changing. That's why we want to get as much of that bright morning light as possible.
Yeah.
And that's really important for two reasons. One, it synchronizes the body clock, but also that helps to boost our serotonin levels, which boosts our mood, and better mood leads to better sleep. So you can see it has a strong knock-on effect.
Really interesting. Does it matter what the weather's like? I mean, is it as valuable to go out when it's rainy as if you say you're living in Portugal or Spain or somewhere like that?
Well, personally, I would like to have bright sunshine, as I'm sure most of us would. But actually, there's a huge difference. You can take your phone, and there are lots of light meter apps which measure the amount of lux, the intensity of the light.
Oh, yes.
And what is even if you're going out on a really gloomy day, you'll still get maybe 3,000-5,000 lux of light. If you go indoors, it'll be maybe 150, 400 at best. So you can see we're massive. As soon as we move indoors behind our wonderful insulated double glazing, it's reflecting all of that light and reducing that light stimulation. So yeah, I would always argue that if you're waking up, if you're struggling to wake up, or if your sleep quality is just not helping you to feel refreshed, then just try getting out for 10 minutes for a little bit of a walk in sunlight, natural light, whatever it is, and that will help.
So this is our starting point in the morning.
Yes.
So this might be quite a good place to move on to something called sleep hygiene, which our readers, viewers may or may not have heard of. So the sleep hygiene, I mean, there are interesting things to say about sleep hygiene, but these are some basics that people should probably know about and maybe already do. And when I had insomnia, I used to throw things at the wall when people talked about insomnia. But there are some really level one things that we should know about, aren't they, before we start to maybe think a bit more in depth about certain aspects.
Absolutely, and I completely understand, having spent most of my working life working with insomniacs, sleep hygiene can be very stressful, but actually for the majority of the population, sleep hygiene can be really helpful.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is they are the basic behavioural and environmental advice and techniques which you can put into practice every day, which are going to improve your sleep.
Yeah.
So the most obvious ones regarding our sleep regulation are going to bed and getting up at the same time. And that ties in nicely with what we were just chatting about our circadian rhythm. So our bodies love regularity, and unfortunately, these days we're not very regular. So, again, a really simple piece of advice is just to try and keep regular habits. So going to bed and getting up at the same time, roughly the same time, every day can be really helpful.
So even on weekends?
Even on weekends.
Even on weekends.
Even on weekends. And there's a term which has become more sort of mainstream in the last 5 years, which is social jet lag, which is where we experience jet lag-like symptoms. So we're feeling groggy, we're feeling nauseous, we've got digestive issues, we're feeling fatigued, we've got that mental fog, etc. And that can occur as a result of just having a long lie-in on the weekend.
Sometimes if you sleep 12 hours, you get up and you feel really strange, don't you? I mean,
Exactly.
I've never quite understood why that is.
Well, it's quite simply, if your wake-up time is normally 7 in the morning and you wake up at midday, well, you've just delayed your sleep phase by 5 hours, which, if let's say you were about to fly to New York, that's fantastic.
Which I do quite a lot, actually, so I'm going to
But if you're still here in the UK, that's really rubbish, because you've just delayed all of the other biological cues.
So that's one thing.
Yeah,
What
so
other
going to
things?
bed and getting up at the same time.
Yeah.
Also, prioritising sleep, just getting enough sleep. Whether that be 7.5, 8 hours, that's the sort of average for most people. But then we've got the basic lifestyle factors. Caffeine. Caffeine is the antagonist to adenosine. Adenosine is the sleepy brain chemical that builds up during the day, helping to push us into sleep. Unfortunately, caffeine comes along and it masks the receptor sites within our brain where adenosine would work, so it sort of masks that sleepiness effect. So super simple. You want to make sure that you drink what caffeine you like, 2 or 3 cups maybe at max, but try to stop it from, say, midday onwards, and then
Would you say midday? That's interesting. Some people I know 3 or 4. Is that more or less what you
the
would
research shows that even if you leave 6 hours, if you abstain from caffeine for 6 hours before bed, that can still have an impact. So I would say, give your sleep the best chance possible. So swap to decaf or herbal alternatives from midday.
Does this count for tea as well as coffee?
Oh, so when you're looking, I would just Google what contains caffeine, because you'll be really surprised.
Some things are surely worse than others, though. I mean,
yes,
or not.
So but we're talking about coffee, we're talking about tea, we're talking about green tea, we're talking about chocolate.
Even green tea.
Even green tea.
Oh, you
yes.
see, I think maybe that's where I'm going wrong. my green tea is all kind of more, that's interesting.
Yeah, many
Dark
people.
chocolate has caffeine in it. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Coca-Cola.
So we've got caffeine. Another big, one of the lifestyle factors is alcohol. Alcohol is just not very good for sleep. We are very clear on this now. The research shows that if you're drinking alcohol, then it's more than likely going to be disturbing your sleep.
So hear that, readers? No more sherries before bed.
And because we have that phrase, a nightcap, don't we? And that's because, and many of our clients at Sleep School will use alcohol to help themselves fall asleep, because alcohol is a sedative. This is the thing I try to skip over quite quickly, because a lot of people jump on this. It's the fact that alcohol does increase deep sleep, but that's actually, that's why it helps people to fall asleep quicker and into a deeper sleep. But it then upsets the balance of all of the sleep stages, and it leads to sleep fragmentation and worse sleep overall. So my advice is, if you're going to have a drink of alcohol, try to leave as much time between drinking alcohol and sleeping. But for every night you have alcohol, leave at least 2 nights of no alcohol, just to preserve sleep as much as possible.
So this leads me on quite nicely to a question from one of our readers. Does diet affect sleep? In particular, the consumption of carbohydrates?
Yeah, so this brings us, exactly onto another really good, important lifestyle factor, diet, and so we can talk about, what we eat, and actually, the research shows that probably the best diet for sleep, so the one which causes the sort of the least amount of sleep disturbance, is a Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of, that echoes what we see from, sort of Mediterranean diet appears to be quite good for our health as well.
Yeah. How would you define the Mediterranean diet?
I think it's containing. We've got I'm not a nutritionist, so someone might pick me up here, but I think we've got a lot of vegetables, fruits and vegetables. We've got good sources of protein, and we've got some healthy fats in there as well.
Yeah.
So it's. Yeah, so what we do know is that if you're consuming more stimulating food, such as the sugars, sort of the unhealthy fats, sort of the caffeine, those types of things, those kind of stimulants, that's going to be disturbing your sleep. And I think that the person there specifically mentioned about carbohydrates. There are different types of carbohydrates. You've got high GI and low GI ones. So if you don't know, the high GI means that the blood, the carbohydrate is broken down very quickly and it enters the bloodstream very quickly, and that causes, what goes up must come down.
Yeah,
and
so it's like a spike.
It causes a spike, and that's so if you're eating, some sort of sugary treat, that's it's going to have a very high GI. We're looking for things to have a sort of carbohydrates to have a low GI, things which are going to provide a slow release of energy to provide us, to help us get through the night.
I've got a very good question here. How does sleep link with weight loss? Is there a
this is a fantastic question, and it's one which is kind of it's been a hot topic for the last sort of decade, and we're constantly seeing more and more research. And so we do know that sleep is really important for helping us to manage our weight, and most of us will know this intuitively. If you've ever had a poor night of sleep, the majority of people will wake up feeling more hungry.
And you go for those carbohydrates, which you think are going to be the quick fix.
You certainly don't go, I fancy a really big salad.
No, you really don't.
you go, I want the sugary treats. I want the things which are going to give us that burst of energy.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately, are not going to be the most helpful for us in the long term. And this is because sleep plays a really important role in managing our appetite hormones, specifically ghrelin and leptin. So ghrelin is responsible for that sense of sort of the hunger. It's the hunger hormone. So basically our desire to eat, and then leptin is responsible for our sort of our feeling of fullness. And so if you're sleep deprived, we end up with more leptin and more ghrelin, so we want to eat more, and less leptin, so we don't know when to stop eating. And so we do know that when people are continually sleep deprived, then they tend to eat more, and they tend to eventually that will lead to weight gain.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it leads me on actually the kind of broken nights. I mean, in a minute I want to come along to the kind of what goes on through your head, and we've got quite a few questions on this, like how to switch off. But I'm interested about naps as well. I mean, especially as you get older, you might want to sleep a bit during the day. I mean, in my sort of research, I've heard naps are good, naps are bad. What's your view?
My view is that naps are good. So the important thing to understand is that there are many different types of nap. So if we pick out two of the most common ones, so the one which is probably most applicable to sort of the vast majority of us is a power nap.
Right.
So with a power nap, we're talking anywhere between, say, 15 and 20 minutes of sleep. It's typically done between midday and 3 p.m. when we have a natural dip in our core body temperature. So there are two biological time points in which we're designed to sleep: the night time and that post-lunch time. So we're sort of, we're biologically okay,
It's not so great if you're working here. Get under your desk for half an hour.
Well, I don't know. We're working with, more and more organisations at Sleep School whereby they are introducing napping rooms to their organisations.
Telegraph beds, okay.
So the power nap, it's 10 to 20 minutes. It's between midday and 3 p.m. No later, because then you run the risk of reducing your sleep drive and worsening your sleep. And the top piece of advice around a power nap is that is really just to sort of don't pressurize yourself with going, I have to fall asleep. Because most people actually within that time period if they do fall asleep, they'll be in light sleep, and most of us don't know we're asleep when we're in light sleep. And so just going, I'm just going to rest in this period, that's still super beneficial. And the crucial thing is that if you want to get good at it, you need to practice it. So build up a habit.
Wow. So do you set an alarm then? Do you have
So,
or get someone to come and wake you up?
With the training that we do with so our, the corporate organisations that we go in and sort of teach employees how to nap, we know that it takes about 3 months to go from I can't nap to I'm a confident napper.
Really?
And there's stages, sort of stages of, you definitely want to start with an alarm clock, but, after 3 months, you can get it down so that you can actually sort of wake up naturally at your desired time.
That's great. So before we come along to kind of what's going on in your mind, which I think for a lot of people is the reason they can't fall asleep or stay asleep or they worry when they wake up, are there any more basic sleep hygiene, practical things that you haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, again, if we just tick off some of the stimulants, sort of nicotine, again, it's a stimulant. Smoking, sort of close to bedtime, that's going to disturb your sleep. If you can, smoking is obviously not great for us.
No.
But if you do smoke, leaving at least 4 hours between smoking and sleeping is going to be beneficial. The other big one is exercise.
Sure.
It makes complete sense. Sort of exercising, it helps to physiologically, it helps to tire us out. So that helps us to fall asleep quicker. It helps us to fall into deeper quality sleep, which is better. But actually, exercise is a fantastic way of managing our mental health. It mops up all of those stress hormones, and so it almost acts as almost like a neurological calming agent. If you have a really good regular exercise program, that's going to really benefit your sleep by benefiting your mental health.
But is it not true? Is it true that it's not good to exercise too close to bed in a kind of intense exercise?
What was really interesting is I read a meta-analysis the other day which actually disproved that.
Really?
Because for many years I've always said, don't exercise close to bedtime because exercise elevates your core body.
Presumably,
Well,
or is
yeah.
it cortisol?
So it elevates your core body temperature as well. This is one of the bigger problems, is that we need a 1 degree drop in our core body temperature in order for us to fall asleep. Okay?
Right.
If you're exercising, that's elevating your core body temperature, and so that could delay that process. I think it's up to the individual to know what works for them, and everyone who's listening is the expert of themselves. I certainly know that if I exercise late at night, that would disturb my sleep. For some people, it might not. So let's, let them be the judge. I think the crucial thing is if you can leave at least a couple of hours between exercising and sleeping, that just makes sense, because it's going to help you to prepare your mind and body better for sleep.
Actually, this brings me on to the thing that really helps me, which is having a bath before bed.
Yeah.
So I remember I was reading it made me laugh so much. It was a study, and they called it passive water-based body heating, which is my favourite thing that I've come across in the whole of reading and learning about sleep. But presumably that's to do with body temperature, is it? Why
Exactly.
a bath or maybe even a shower can help you before bed?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're wanting, as I mentioned, in order to fall asleep, sleep is regulated by a number of factors, one being your core body temperature. And we need that drop in our core body temperature. If you have a warm bath, we all know that you go bright pink, and that's your body's sort of internal thermostat desperately trying to protect your sort of state of homeostasis. And so what it does is it opens up your peripheral vasculature, so all your blood vessels. It tries to get lots of heat out of the body. So by trying to sort of shunt heat away from the core to cool you down, it inadvertently assists with that process.
I love my bath. But is it not also that it's just part of your routine? It's your body saying it's nearly bedtime.
Exactly.
Or your mind saying it's nearly bedtime.
Exactly. And we can get very sort of wrapped up in the science and going, okay, well, I need this to lower my core body temperature. But actually, it's more just about, like you say, if you do it as a routine activity, that is, we're creatures of habit. Your internal body clock's going, oh, they're doing that thing again. Look, they're dimming the lights. They're having their bath. Oh, this means that sleep's on its way. But also, it's a helpful way of reducing physical tension. I'm probably, it's probably helping to reduce mental sort of tension as well. So yeah, it can be a good thing.
That leads me to another interesting one, again, which I've read and heard conflicting things about, is watching TV or being on your laptop before you go to bed.
Yes.
So there's the issue of blue light, But then perhaps there's the issue of this is what relaxes me. So what would you say about TV or a laptop or a tablet before bed?
Yeah, so whenever I'm answering these questions, I've got two hats. I've got my sort of, my general sort of public hat, sort of, and I've got my clinical hat.
Yeah.
And so if my clinical hat is the fact that, I was in clinic yesterday. I spoke to at least two people who are reliant on using TV as a way to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So they are unhelpfully sort of focusing on the TV in order to avoid the sort of the feelings of anxiety, the fear of not sleeping. So it's an avoidance strategy.
Right.
And in that situation, it's an unhelpful sleep aid because, as I said to them, okay, if I was to say tonight you're not allowed that, the response was, that would make me feel very anxious.
Yeah.
So we now know that they have an unhelpful relationship, a reliance on it.
Yeah.
And what we do at Sleep School is we teach people to sleep naturally without a reliance on something, something.
Mm-hmm.
If someone came to me and said, "Well, I don't do it all the time, and I'm not. I could stop it at any time," I would go, "Okay, it's not the end of the world. It's important." But the middle ground is also understanding that we've got these incredible light-sensitive cells in our eyes, and if you're really wanting to improve the quality of your sleep, which, if I think about my own sleep, I make sure that in the last 2 hours before going to bed, I am darkening down. And because that's the simplest way to signal to your brain to start releasing melatonin, the sleep-promoting hormone. And so if I'm sat there on a screen, and generally when we're looking at a screen, if we're in bed, sort of the screen is quite close, the light hasn't got anywhere to go, and it's just going straight into our eyes, and that confuses that body clock, and it says, okay, well, maybe it's not time to be sleeping right now. Maybe we need to inhibit melatonin, activate cortisol, and that can then lead to reduced sleep quality, causing us to wake up feeling unrefreshed.
Well, sometimes it's not even as scientific as that, is it? It's like an email's arriving from work, or you see something on Facebook that thinks, oh God, I've got to do this tomorrow. So it's not even just the light, is it? It's the constant bombardment of information and requests and needs and
exactly. And I think that is it's definitely something that we're seeing more of. And since the pandemic, we have had this new term appear in our vernacular, which is the doom scrolling.
Yes, doom scrolling.
And which, if you're not aware, this relates to the natural human trait of wanting to sort of know about any sort of perceived threat. And the problem is, in this day and age, we've got all sorts of uncertainty, and it's fed to us in the news, and our brains are just addicted to it. I feel it the same. I want to know about, sort of what's happening in politics. I want to know about what war's going on. But the problem is 72% of us, according to a recent study, do it in bed. And so, as you said,
not ideal, is it?
It's not just the light stimulation, that's activating, it's activating our stress hormones at a time when we want to be moving from a sympathetic dominant state, which is the state which gives us the get up and go, the fight and flight in the day, into a more parasympathetic dominant state, the more care and repair system which prepares the mind and body for sleep.
So a book is a good thing.
A book, a good old-fashioned print book is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, preferably not too exciting one. No, actually, at least you can turn it off. It doesn't have a mind of its own. So now a couple of people have asked questions on this theme, and, I think many of us will want to know the answer to this. How can I stop the running commentary in my head, which happens when I start sleeping?
Yes. Yeah, really good question. And, we do, obviously, we've got our clinic, we do surveys every year, a State of the UK Sleep Survey, and it's the number one thing which people report as disturbing their sleep. It's that sort of that mental chatter. Yeah. And I guess if we were to look at the sort of the broader aspects of the way we live our lives these days, we are human doings now, we're not human beings. And so we wake up in the morning and we literally go and we don't pause. Whereas perhaps in times gone past, sort of pre-digital age, there was more pausing.
Yeah.
We'd be on a bus, we'd be on a train, we'd we just have more downtime, mental downtime. And that's really important. We know that helps to, when you have downtime, you activate a part of your brain called your default mode network, which is kind of, it's a way of the brain sort of catching up on everything that you've done so far. Now, these days, because we literally as soon as we stop doing something, we pick up something else and start doing that.
Yeah.
There's no downtime. So what many of us find is that we get to bed, we put our head on the pillow, and then bing, our mind just goes, oh, thank goodness, right, time to catch up on the day.
Yeah, wow.
And so we're left in this place. So that kind of hopefully gives people a little bit of an idea that actually if we want to have less mental chatter, at bedtime, well then we perhaps need to sort of allow in times to, sort of release the pressure valve a little bit during the day. But at Sleep School, we are we've helped to pioneer the use of a behavioural therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is a third wave psychological therapy that a part of it includes mindfulness-based meditations, that kind of noticing. And this is a really powerful way. So our thinking mind loves to think. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, 70% of which are...
Who counted them? How interesting.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. We're believed to have 60,000 thoughts a day.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that statistic. Yes.
I think what's more interesting is the fact that nearly sort of 3/4 of them tend to be more on the sort of the problem-solving, worrisome basis.
Interesting. That's interesting.
And again, evolutionary psychologists believe that happens because the more you could worry about everything that was going to eat you or go wrong, the greater your chance of survival.
Yes.
So we have this natural tendency to worry, which means that we are lying in bed and we've got all of these worries. How you behave in response to those worries is absolutely critical. And as people who are listening will know, the more you try to block them, stop them, change them, the bigger and stronger they become. What happens is they end up bringing their friends in with them and you've suddenly got even more thoughts.
Yeah.
And so what ACT seeks to do is to teach people how to notice thoughts in this very sort of neutral, non-judging way. So rather than getting caught up in them, they're becoming more of an objective observer. So they're noticing them and then allowing them to pass. And so that might, to put that into sort of practical sense. So for example, you might get into bed and we talk about a really simple exercise called getting out of your head and into your bed. And what we mean by that is just begin by focusing your attention onto your feet. And then move slowly up, just noticing where your body makes contact with the bed. So you're grounding your mind's attention into the physical contact of the bed and your body. So you go, I can feel the duvet on my toes, I can feel the mattress on my back, I can feel the pillow on my face. The whole time you do this, your mind will go, yeah, but what about the news I just read? Or what about, sort of how I'm going to pay the bills? Or what about tomorrow, etc. And when you acknowledge those thoughts, you may even label them. You go, okay, that's a health thought, that's a finance thought. And then you allow it to pass and you just come back to noticing in the present moment again, that sort of sense of connection. And the crucial thing is that you're not trying to get rid of the thoughts, you're open and accepting of the thoughts whilst allowing them to pass. So you're loosening the relationship that you have between them.
What about writing things down? That's what I do. I write the things down for tomorrow and it's like it doesn't have to be in my head. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's everything we do at Sleep School is evidence-based.
Yeah.
So everything we recommend. And there is evidence which shows that people who keep a list, who do list writing before going to bed, that can be beneficial. It can help people to fall asleep quicker. What I would be cautious of is with our insomnia clients is, they can tend to start writing small volumes in the night.
Oh dear.
And so I would, so
that's interesting.
It's that sort of, we want the night to be about resting and sleeping. We don't want it to be about writing a short essay. So, but if you want to park stuff at the beginning of the night, go for it.
So again, quite a few questions, and this happens to me, that kind of middle of the night waking.
Yeah.
Looking at, oh my God, it's 4 o'clock, then it's 4:30, then it's 4:35. That kind of, when I had terrible insomnia, it was that low point when it's just starting to get light and you've lost.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm not going to go back to sleep. How do you deal with that one?
what's really interesting about what you just said there, and can I just touch on that
Please
first? Because I
do.
love the words that you use, that I've lost. And actually, the reason why I moved to a more acceptance-based approach is because I heard this story over and over again, where clients would be awake all night struggling, and then they would get to 6 a.m. and they would go, well, that's it. The night's ruined. You know, sort of. I've got to be up at 7. It's over. At which point, many of them would then fall asleep.
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of admitting defeat. Maybe it's a good thing, that acceptance
Well,
of.
Yeah, it was. You know, it is that in that sort of Western world, we would go, well, we're giving in. But in that sort of more, now we know that it actually what it was doing is cultivating a level of acceptance, and that's what we've learned to be able to teach clients to cultivate in the middle of the night.
That's interesting.
But so the big question is about waking up in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there are many people listening who wake up in the middle of the night and it just, you know, it can fill you with dread, fear, anxiety, or just frustration, boredom, you know, anger.
Is this something that happens a bit more as you get older, would you say? Do you wake up
Absolutely.
more? Yeah.
Absolutely. So we need a little bit of the physiology first.
Yeah.
So there is a general myth out there that people should put their head on the pillow here, and they should wake up here, and there should be absolutely nothing in between.
Right.
And so we set the benchmark really high.
do.
But and what that suggests is that we kind of go down to sleep. Most people who come to the clinic believe we go into sleep and then we kind of stay down and then we come up. And that's not actually what happens. So you probably heard we sleep in cycles. So we sleep in cycles which are an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And during those cycles, we will cycle through the various sleep stages. So we'll cycle into light sleep, into deep sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, a little bit of light. And then we might have a very brief awakening. And then we'll go back into the next cycle. And, you know, sort of, we hypothesized that the rationale behind these awakenings was for survival reasons. There's, you know, a theory around it helps with memory consolidation, helps to onboard large amounts of data, or just basic theories like it helps us to get up to go to the toilet, or helps us, you know, sort of to relieve discomfort, for example.
Yep.
So the point being is that we have the average 8-hour sleeper has sort of 4 or 5 cycles a night, which means they have 4 or 5 brief awakenings a night. Now, when you are in your early 20s, you are very unlikely to, that's kind of the golden age of sleep, you know, sort of the...
And you don't realise it, do you?
No, exactly, you just abuse it. But you're very, most, you know, sort of young, you know, sort of late teens, early 20s will get that wonderful sleep right through and not be aware of any awakening. But you're exactly right, as we get older, it becomes harder to tie those sleep cycles together. We have more psychological pressures, so you know, we might have health issues which we're worried about. Might have, you know, sort of elderly parents who we're looking after. We might have, you know, greater responsibility for our job. We've got more financial worries, etc. So that can
grandchildren
that can claw us out.
Yeah.
But then we also have the physical issues. You know, might have a physical health issue, you know, prostate issues.
Yeah.
We might have you know, physical pain, arthritis, etc.
Menopause for women.
Menopause, exactly. So it becomes harder to tie those cycles together, and it really does increase the chance that we'll find ourselves waking up.
This is interesting. Could it be normal to have 2 sleeps as people did hundreds of years ago?
Yeah, this is something which has come about in the last, I think it was the last decade ago. A researcher discovered that sort of in the, I think it was the late 17th century, early 18th century, I might be wrong. Anyway, pre-industrial revolution. So we're talking pre sort of any, you know, lighting, etc. There appeared to be a natural movement towards 2 phases of sleep. And you know, if you imagine right now the majority, you know, sort of if we were plunged into darkness like back then, well then there wasn't a huge amount to do.
No.
Unless you were wildly rich, most people couldn't even afford candles to light the house. You know, there's that old phrase, the gambling phrase, the game's not worth the candle. So it kind of gives you an idea that, you know, actually darkness was very prominent back then. And so people would fall asleep at 8. they would get a chunk of sleep till 4 hours, wake up at midnight, and then typically they would, they would go one of two ways. They would either pray or gamble, sort of, for a couple of hours, and then they would get another. And it was a way of spreading the sleep over that period of time. Does it work in the world that we live in today? It might work for some, say, a shift worker or something like that. But for the vast majority of us, we'll definitely benefit from a much more consolidated sleep phase. With the average being, say, sort of 10 till 6, for example.
Yeah. So let's move on a bit to remedies, actually, things that people try to help them sleep better, what works and what doesn't. I've got quite a few questions on this, but I would like to ask something from my own experience. When I had my worst insomnia, which was, about 15 years ago, the very first thing that happened was I went to my GP and my GP gave me sleeping tablets. Now, some of our readers may be on sleeping pills or other sleep aids. So obviously many medications can affect your sleep, which might be something that you want to address. But I'm interested in what your view is of specifically pills, medications for sleep.
Yeah. And I think it's worth giving the context as well, because I've been now working with insomniacs for nearly 20 years. And over that time, we have seen a big change in the behavior of our GPs and our doctors. I have huge respect for them. They're on the front line of insomnia, and many of them are not equipped with the tools. They have some simple sleep hygiene guidelines, which if you're an insomniac can be infuriating, because it's like, yes, I've tried all of that. And if anything, we try to teach our insomniacs to relinquish their sleep hygiene guidelines, to relax them a little bit. To have a glass of wine or to have a coffee or something, not feel that you need to do a marathon every day, because it's kind of, that can end up putting sleep on a pedestal. It's like, I have to do all of this in order to achieve this.
Yeah, sleep is like the opposite of achievement, really, isn't it? You sort of have to forget about it so it creeps up on you. But going back to pills.
Yeah, going back to pills. So my point was that certainly, let's say 10, 15 years ago, there was definitely a more liberal delivery of sleeping medication. We've certainly seen that now most doctors are recommending according to the NICE guidelines, and so they're providing short courses. As far as at Sleep School, everything we do is non-drug based, and the reason for that is 82% of the people who come to see us are taking medication, have taken medication, and they're trying to come off. And just to be clear, we're not anti-medication. Medication can have a really beneficial effect for certain individuals in a short term. So if someone is experiencing some sort of trauma, and medication helps them to sleep through, to get the sleep they need to protect their mental health in that short term, that can be really valuable. But if medication is allowed to be supplied, over the long term, then it's kind of like the solutions become part of the problem. And what we see is an over-reliance. Lots of clients will begin to lose their trust in their natural ability to sleep. They'll say things like, and I had this yesterday in clinic, several of the clients were sort of like, well, I can't sleep unless I take my Zopiclone, or unless I take my Temazepam. And that's where it's obviously, it's become a sleep aid. And so what we want to do is to teach clients how to sleep naturally without a dependency, physical or psychological, on that sleeping medication.
But I do think it is worth saying that you can't just stop. You have to treat these medicines with care, don't you, if you've been on them for years?
Absolutely. And I think it's fundamental that if you are currently taking any sort of sleeping medication, and you think, okay, well, I'm interested in perhaps changing it, then you should always consult your doctor or whoever has prescribed it with you.
Slow what they call a tapering regime.
Exactly. The doctor will be able to give them the best exit strategy for that, and we will often liaise with them to of that process. So that's fundamental.
So I've got a question here about, are there any herbal remedies that can help?
Yeah, so this is when we talk about remedies, which people
Is that the
can
right
take.
word? Maybe it's not the right word. Sleep aids.
Well, when we talk about sleep aids in general,
Yeah.
so sleep aids can be sort of drug-based, and so they might be prescription-based drugs that we were
Yeah.
just talking about, the most
Yeah.
common being Zopiclone, Zolpidem, etc.
Yeah.
And then we've got the over-the-counter medication, most commonly, sort of some Nitols and things like that.
They have an antihistamine in them. Is that the active ingredient?
Yeah, exactly. And then we've got the herbal remedies. Now, my big issue, with herbal remedies, is that they still don't have enough evidence base supporting them, and so that's one issue. The other issue is that many of our clients are taking a sort of like a Smarties sort of selection, where they're going, well, I've got a Zopiclone, I'll throw a melatonin in there, I'll stick in a Nitol, and I'll throw in a herbal remedy for good luck. And so we still have clients who are psychologically reliant on herbal remedies.
Yeah.
Whether that be tryptophan or whatever it may be. So it's again the same approach applies. I'd much rather teach them evidence-based behavioural techniques so that they can sleep naturally without a reliance.
So, for example, I've got a question here about CBD. Now, my thing, some of these things can actually be quite expensive, can't they?
Yeah, and I think I've got this phrase that if you ask a normal sleeper what they do to sleep, they'll tell you they do nothing. If you ask an insomniac what they do to sleep, they'll give you a list as long as their arm.
So interesting and so true.
And they have, you can see they have spent so much. They have, and that's not just, that could be financial, but that's emotional. That is, time. There's many different measures of that sort of spent energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, financially, clients will come to us, and that's actually one of the reasons why we'll often explore what have you done so far, and that's what moves people towards more an acceptance-based approach, because they realise, well, I've tried everything else under the sun and nothing's worked. Maybe I need to stop trying. Maybe the issue is the struggle itself.
Because sleep is free, right? It's a free, fantastic thing.
And I would add to that, because that's really beautiful, sleep is free.
Yeah.
But also, sleep is natural. Sleep is a natural biological process that is out of our control. And one of the problems is that when we experience sleep problems, we kind of treat it like if our phone broke. If our phone broke, well, our problem-solving brain kicks in. It goes, right, who's going to fix it? Where can I buy a new one?
So true.
And that works. But sleep is not a phone. The problem-solving the hell out of sleep.
So true. It becomes all-encompassing. When I had my years of insomnia, all I could think about was going to sleep. I was like, worried and nervous about going to sleep first thing in the morning, whereas if you sleep normally, you're thinking about the next day. The sleep is just like the air bridge.
Yeah.
It's the bit that gets you to the next day, isn't it? And that's the holy grail. That's the thing we all really want to find and need, isn't it?
It's that, desperation, and I understand it's the desperation and the drive, the anxiety which fuels people to do. And I've seen, the sort of the strange, the weird and wacky things that people have done and taken in order to try and just get a little bit of sleep. And so when you are sleep deprived, it drives us.
And it is hell. If anyone here, has been through terrible insomnia, I know what it's like, and it's really, it ruins your life. So the sooner we can get to a place of peace where we can just go to bed and enjoy our day. So I have a question for you, Dr. Guy. How well do you sleep? What's your trick, or do you not have one? Is this the kind of where the end point really?
I get asked this a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important question, because a lot of people think, oh, I must be like a super sleeper.
You have a badge.
Yeah, exactly. But the reality is I'm a normal sleeper.
Yeah.
Now, one of the interesting reason as to why I got into insomnia is, one, it was sort of professional interest, but also it's personal, because and there's no irony lost, I got insomnia as a result of doing years of sleep studies.
I can imagine that would
basically
happen.
Spending all night watching other people sleep. It's shift
imagine.
work, and I'm sure we've got shift workers on this call. They'll know that it misaligns your whole circadian system, and that kicked off my insomnia. So I know what it's like to experience insomnia. But now my sleep is, I had a stinking cold the other day. My sleep was disturbed. My kids are grown up now, but when they were young, my sleep was disturbed, destroyed.
Oh yeah, God, those early years. Yeah.
I have to get up early for events, that disturbs. So I'm not immune, but what I do have is a wealth of tools, and all of the tools that we now teach at Sleep School using acceptance commitment therapy, I use 100% to be able to meet and greet my anxieties, my fears, my pain that shows up, etc. And to be able to respond in the most helpful way that helps to create the space from which sleep can emerge.
That's great. So let me see what other questions we have here. Yeah, Anthony here. What if you can't get to sleep due to physical pain? For example, back pain he's talking about here.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing, Anthony, to recognise is that there is this bidirectional relationship between pain and sleep. Unfortunately, we know that pain will drive poor sleep because it's shifting you from, it's stopping you from getting into the deeper phases of sleep, and it's shifting you into sort of lighter sleep and wakefulness. What we also know is that poor sleep increases the inflammatory markers in the blood, so you end up feeling more pain.
Yeah.
So this is a really challenging. Now, it's a challenging situation. What's really interesting is acceptance and commitment therapy has a really strong body of research proving it to be effective for the treatment of chronic pain. And what is the way it approaches it is we can't get rid of the pain. I'm sure Anthony's done everything he can to sort of manage the pain as best he can.
Yeah.
But what we can do is change the way we respond to the pain. And so when we talk about pain, you've got the original pain, and then you've got your response to it, which is determines how much you amplify that pain. So often what we find with the clients of ours who have pain is that they're struggling against it. They are, and I understand this is easier said than done, but we teach, the tools, because it's that struggle, which is the trying to get rid of it, the battle to lessen it, just the anxiety around it. Is it going to keep me awake tonight, etc.
That makes sense.
Amplifies it into a much bigger place. So the one thing we'll do is we'll teach you those psychological tools to help lessen that sort of amplification process, lessen that struggle. But then also, we want to do what we can. So we were talking about naps, and I realised I talked about a power nap, but I didn't talk about a full cycle nap.
Right.
So a full cycle nap is where you're getting a full cycle of sleep, so an hour and a half or 2 hours of sleep during the day. Now, this might not be possible, but some pain sufferers, for example, might find that their nighttime sleep is so fragmented that they have to get up during the night, they have to alleviate it with stretching, with hot water bottles or anything that can help. As a result of that, they might split their sleep a little bit. They might get a full cycle nap during the daytime, and by lowering that sleep debt, that helps to reduce that sort of the pain in the system. So it's about trying to find what's going to be most helpful. So I would always ask them to make sure that they're getting the best help from the pain specialist, but also speak to psychologists who are going to help them with the pain as well, and then a sleep specialist as well.
Yeah. So I have one more reader question, and then I'm going to leave this with a question of my own. My problem is I keep falling asleep during the day. How do I stop that? Or does it matter?
Okay, so if someone is experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness, that is, and so by that what we're talking about is you might be falling asleep, sort of sat in a chair watching TV. It could be extended to I fall asleep whilst as a passenger in a car. It could be I fall asleep whilst at traffic lights or talking to someone more severe. So what I would instantly be concerned about is what's happening with their nighttime sleep quality. So excessive daytime sleepiness is often suggesting that there might be something going on with their sleep. So,
Right.
you know, for example, they might have sleep apnea, which is where you stop breathing at night, and that's a really common cause of excessive daytime sleepiness. And there's a very simple survey called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which you can sort of Google. Epworth Sleepiness Scale.
How do you spell that?
EPWORTH.
Great.
Sleepiness Scale.
Yeah.
And there, I think, 11 questions, and it will just give you an indicator as to the likelihood of you falling asleep during the day. And I would then take that to your GP and say, look, I did this. This gives the indication. That sort of gives a bit of a measure as to how bad the sleepiness is. And it might be that they get referred to an NHS-based sleep clinic, and it could be they explore other sleep disorders, because obviously in this situation I don't know, but it might be they have restless legs. It might be they have insomnia, nightmares, or something else. So
I'd not heard of that.
We want to know what's going on at night.
Okay. So my last question: what are 3 things that I can do tomorrow to sleep better tomorrow night?
Okay.
3 things, if you had to think of 3.
Sure. So I'm a huge fan of light. It's just the best stuff in the world, and it's so simple. So I would, I do it every day. I actually have, at this time of year, I have a light therapy lamp.
Do you?
So when I arrive at my desk, I switch on my lamp and I get 10,000 lux of light sort of blasting into my sort of visual space for sort of 10 to 20 minutes. And it just helps to give me that little bit of get up and go, especially in these winter months. But I will always make sure that, I get a bit of about a 10 or 15 minute walk every single morning, just to make sure that I'm getting that light. So, that's the first one. Super simple. The second one is this is on the more sort of psychological insomnia kind of related one, is try not to struggle so much about your sleep. And the reason for that is we know that more struggle means more wakefulness. It means insomnia is a hyperarousal syndrome. So the more we struggle, the more awake we are, the more anxious we feel, and so if we can lessen that struggle, then that's going to be beneficial. And a simple way in which to do that would be to do some sort of noticing exercise. So whether that be just noticing your breath, and we're not doing deep breathing or anything like that. You're just sort of paying attention to your breath, as it goes in and out. You notice if your mind wanders off onto thoughts, you let them go and you just come back to your breath. So it's a little bit of mindful meditation. And then, I guess, again, another really super simple one would be to make sure you prioritize sleep. It's the start. It's 2023. It's January 2023.
Is it? Oh God, it is.
So why not make this the year of prioritizing sleep in your life? It is the single most powerful, performance-enhancing, health-providing behavior known to humankind. Just let's spend a little bit less time on Netflix and a little bit more time.
I love sleeping. It's the best thing. It's the best thing.
It is.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you. I think that brings our event to a close. I mean, what a positive ending. Thank you to Dr. Guy Meadows for sharing his wisdom. All the subscribers who've joined us. Anyone who would like to know more about my personal sleep journey, you can buy my book. It's called The Insomnia Diaries, How I Learned to Sleep Again. And then we also have Dr. Guy's sleep book and the Sleep School app, which I think is definitely worth a download and a look.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everybody.